Hello, I'm Joana Cunha Cruz from the Department of Community and Clinical Science of the School of Dentistry at the University of Alabama in Birmingham. And today we'll be talking about surveys. And this is an overview of what we will be talking today, but you also have more resources in the Coho Institute's Canvas sites. I will be giving you an overview of the content that's in there. Why do we do survey research? So survey research is a form of scientific inquiry that merits rigorous design and analysis. The aim of a survey is to gather reliable and unbiased data from a representative sample of respondents. There are certain steps to conduct a survey, and I would like to focus on planning this study so that we have a well-designed survey that you can have reliable and unbiased results. During planning, it's very important to identify if you are doing a descriptive study or an explanatory study. In a descriptive study, you will be reporting factual data. For example, what's the prevalence of a condition? And in an explanatory study, you will be trying to draw inference between construct or concepts. You were trying to look at associations and correlations. The first step in your planning phase is to identify what's the objective of your study and develop a conceptual or theoretical model. To do that, it's very helpful that you identify your PCAT question. And here we say PCATs instead of with I, where the emphasis here is in thinking about exposure, because we don't have an intervention in a survey research. We're talking here about what is your exposure, your comparison, and what's your primary and secondary outcomes. Which instrument you're going to use, we talked about that previously, and we should be thinking about identifying valid and reliable instruments to include in your questionnaire. And finally, do you have ethical approval? Then submit to your institutional review board your protocol so that that can be approved and develop the consent process to the participants. It's very important that you pilot your questionnaire. You can do a process called cognitive testing or think aloud process, where you get your potential participants, you get a sample of them, maybe 2 or 5 of them, to review your questionnaire. And you can ask them to complete the questionnaire and think aloud, tell you what are they thinking when they're completing the questionnaire. So how are they arriving at certain answers? Do they show confusion or surprise at a particular response? Do any questions need to be repeated or explained? In those instances, you may think about how can you improve your question or response options so that it's more valid and reliable. And then basically, you also want to know how long does it take to complete it, because we know that shorter surveys will increase your response rate than longer ones. After you have your questionnaire, then we need to think about who are you going to be providing the questionnaire. Think about what's your universe that you want to understand that phenomenon. You are not going to do a census where you're going to interview every single person. So you want to have a sample of those that represents the persons of interest that you are focusing your questionnaire on. So if you are trying to infer and to estimate prevalence, you probably will want to go to probability sampling. That could either be a simple random sample, a systematic sample, or stratified random sample, where in this way you will have a representative sample of the population of interest. Another way of doing a survey could be also with non-probability sampling, but that will be harder to estimate prevalence of the condition, but it's okay. And depending on the topic, it might be the only way you can develop your survey. Like, for example, snowball sampling. It's very used if you are doing a survey with people that is addicted to illegal drugs, because it's really hard to identify those persons. So what you do is you interview, you give the questionnaire to the first, to a small sample or that you could identify, and they will help you identify the next ones. So that's a very helpful way of doing research on hard to reach populations. But the main thing was, when you are doing to select your sample, is to consult with a biostatistician. They will help you identify what type of sampling scheme you should have, but also what is the minimum sample size that you need to achieve. Now it's time to go to the field to send out your questionnaire, to do your survey. You could be doing it by mail, not very common anymore, by phone, online, or face-to-face. And even when face-to-face, you can use paper or a tablet, right? So here we have one example of a survey that was conducted by a group of investigators at WSU. And what they did is they sent a postal invite on the mail with a $2 check or cash with the URL of the survey. You can see that not many people typed in the URL, but they received that incentive to respond to the survey. Then afterward, they sent an email, like the same day, the next day. Participants received an email, 2 emails actually, with some days apart in different times of the day. Next, they sent a paper questionnaire and followed up with an email. You can see that the response rate increased, especially between the first email and the second email. It's the first time you send the survey. That's when you have the highest response rates. Then it's increasing, it's go incrementally, and you can see that mail surveys. There were a little bit of people who answered the paper one, they prefer that. And those can be people who are hard to reach nowadays in this age of technology. So you might be willing to consider the mail survey, even though it adds costs, because otherwise you might not have access to that population that prefer to answer a mail survey. It's not so common anymore. I think most people have tablets, but I wouldn't dismiss the potential to reach more people or more representative sample of your population, thinking about sending by mail. There are different things you can do to increase your response rates. Here is an example of how to increase response rates of postal questionnaires. This is a systematic review that looked at randomized control trials that compared different things that you could do when you are developing your questionnaire or giving out your questionnaire. And you can see here some are very obvious, like, for example, a shorter questionnaire, you have an increased response rates than a longer questionnaire. But one that I really like is to put the more interesting questions in the beginning of the survey instead of the leaving it to the end. So, for example, I like to put the demographic information it's easy to answer, but it's not very interesting at the end of the questionnaire. That could make people start your questionnaire more than if you just started with what's your race, gender, or age. You can see also that having follow-up, it's important. So having an incentive, even a non-monetary incentive, might increase your response rates. And giving a pre-contact, like sending a message that you are going to receive this survey, also increase the response rates. So those are suggestions on how you could enhance your response rates when you are doing a questionnaire and sending it out via survey methods. Now that you sent your survey, you need to enter the data if you are doing paper. So that's one advantage of doing online questionnaire or using a tablet. The participant is the one entering the data. That's very helpful. You will be checking the data and cleaning the data. And do not wait until the end of the questionnaire period administration to look at the data. Should be entering the data and analyzing the data, at least for spot checking for quality as you go. Once you have your data, you are going to analyze your data, and you might need the help from a biostatistician, but if it could be that you will be reporting just simple prevalence. Remember to reporting your missing data. Remember to report the response rates of your survey, and think about what's your audience. You don't need to report everything that you data that you collected, but if you have thought out, you will have pared down the content of a questionnaire and make it very purposeful. And you, since you've done your mock tables in the beginning, it will be so much easier to report your findings once you have the data. You can use the reporting guidelines for surveys like the cherries. That's very, very helpful to draft your reports and even publish your manuscripts. We need to be careful when doing surveys because we could be introducing bias in the way, depending on the way we select our sample or the way we measure our phenomenon. Different bias, selection bias, are sampling bias, non-coverage bias, and non-response bias. You can read more details about those in the Canvas website for the Coho Institutes. And then, like I talked before, invalid and unreliable instruments can also introduce measurement bias. Those kinds of selection bias, like having non-coverage, non-response, not necessarily introduce bias. So it depends on how that happens. So it's a good practice to have some way to measure or to gather some more additional information to see if your results are biased. When you are reading a survey, you can use a critical appraisal tool like this one here, and to think about, is this study valid? What is the quality of this research? How biased they are? So here you can see a few things to look for when you are reading a survey paper. I wanted to present to you one example of a survey that we did. I'm part of the National Dental Practice-Based Research Network, which is funded by NIDCR, the National Institute, which is part of the National Institutes of Health here in the United States. And it's a network of more than 7,000 dentists and dental hygienists and dental therapists that are conducting research in their own practices. So the university helps them help establish this network and help investigators and researchers implement research in those practices with the input from the practitioners. So we did a brief survey, only 5 questions, and asked practitioners what's the access to care for patients with cleft lips and cleft lip palates. And what we saw is that 66% of the respondents provided some periodic dental examinations for this type of diagnosis and this type of patients. They do radiographs and oral hygiene and restorative care. So it seems that a lot of them were seeing patients with cleft lip and palates. A few of them were even providing orthodontic care. We have many orthodontists in our network. We asked them what are the barriers for providing care, and here is the response. And as you would expect, many of them lacked educational training on aspects related to cleft and craniofacial care. Others lacked experience to providing care for these patients, and some mentioned financial implication and insurance implications. It was interesting that 13% of respondents were formally affiliated with a cleft craniofacial team, and 32% mentioned that they were not, but they were interested in being affiliated. The motivators for providing oral health care for those with cleft lip and palates were that they wanted to help the patients. They wanted the experience of providing that care. They had personal connection or experience with patients with disabilities. They wanted to be engaged in the community. And I thought it's interesting that about a quarter to 1/5 of them had prior educational training. One thing that I would like to say to you is that this is not a representative sample of practitioners. It's not even a representative sample of practitioners in our network. So this was totally a quick poll that did not try to be representative of the whole population of dentists or the whole population of dentists in our network. So basically, this is a purposive sample. If you wanted to participate, you would respond to this quick poll. So keep that in mind when you look at those numbers and think about what kind of bias we would be expecting to see in those results. It's not that they are not useful, but we need to be aware of the types of bias that could be represented here, which one of them I would expect is that this is overestimating the number of dentists who treat patients with cleft lip and palate. So we got to the end of our lecture on surveys, and I want to bring home those points here. So the method of administration should be determined by scientific considerations, not just costs. And you saw how that could impact your survey. Entering, checking, and cleaning the data should be done as the study progresses. Don't try to include all the results when reporting studies. Be very mindful of what you are including in your questionnaire and also what you are reporting. Do include exclusion criteria, how you select your sample, and data on non-respondents, so that I can have an idea of what kind of bias we are dealing here in a survey. Thank you very much for your time. It was my pleasure to be here today. And I would like to encourage you to join the National Dental PBRN. You can be a member of our network. It can be international members or members in the United States. If you can go to this website, you can click join or updates, and that will prompt you to complete a brief questionnaire since we're talking about questionnaire, to join the network, you need to complete a questionnaire about you and your practice. And then you will be able to receive information, and you will be joining a group of practitioners that are interested in advancing science in their practice and helping build the evidence base for our profession. And with that, we could be increasing and improving patients' oral health. Well, thank you very much. And if you want to reach me, here is my email. Thank you.